The radio crackled with static, then silence. In the operations center at Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, every eye fixed on the communications board where red lights blinked like dying stars. SEAL Team 6 had gone dark 15 minutes ago, their last transmission nothing more than fragmented words. Heavy contact. Surrounded. Need immediate. Then nothing. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb rubbed his weathered face, staring at the tactical display. 8 of America's finest warriors were pinned down in the Kunar Valley, surrounded by an estimated 40 Taliban fighters in terrain so hostile that even the mountains seemed to conspire against rescue attempts. The valley's razor-sharp ridges created radio shadows, turning communication into a deadly game of chance. Satellite imagery showed muzzle flashes like fireflies in the darkness, concentrated around a cluster of mud brick compounds where his men had taken shelter. "Sir, we've lost contact with Razor Team," the communications sergeant reported, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Webb had seen that look before, the hollow stare of someone watching good men die from a distance, helpless to intervene. The sergeant's fingers danced across his console, cycling through frequencies, desperate for any sign of life from the valley below. The mission had started as routine reconnaissance. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was meeting with local commanders in the remote village of Ghaziabad. The SEALs had inserted under cover of darkness, rappelling from Black Hawks into what should have been a quick in-and-out operation. But intelligence had been wrong before, and tonight it had been catastrophically wrong. Instead of a small meeting, they'd stumbled into a major Taliban gathering, fighters from 3 different cells converging for what appeared to be a coordinated offensive planning session. Webb's jaw tightened as he studied the topographical map spread across his desk. The valley was a natural fortress, with only one viable extraction point, a narrow saddle between 2 peaks that offered barely enough space for a helicopter to hover. Every other approach was either too steep, too narrow, or covered by interlocking fields of fire from the surrounding ridges. The Taliban had chosen their ground well. "What assets do we have available?" Webb asked his operations officer, though he already knew the answer would disappoint him. The nearest Apache attack helicopters were conducting operations 60 miles to the south. The AC-130 gunship was committed to another mission in Helmand Province. Even if they could redirect air support, the response time would be 45 minutes minimum, far too long for men under sustained fire with limited ammunition. "Sir," came a voice from the back of the operations center, clear and unwavering despite the chaos surrounding them. "I have an A-10 on station, 15 minutes out." Every head turned toward the voice. Captain Kestrel Ghost Thorne stood near the intelligence station, her flight suit pristine despite having just returned from a patrol mission over the Pakistan border. Her call sign had been earned not through any dramatic combat action, but through her uncanny ability to appear and disappear from radar coverage, using terrain masking and electronic warfare techniques that had frustrated both enemy air defenses and her own training officers. Some pilots flew like they owned the sky. Ghost flew like she was borrowing it. Webb's expression shifted from desperate hope to practiced skepticism in the span of a heartbeat. He'd heard the stories about Thorne, 3 tours, 2 distinguished flying crosses, and a reputation for unconventional tactics that either saved lives or earned reprimands, depending on who was telling the story. But tonight wasn't about reputation or politics. Tonight was about 8 men who needed extraction from an impossible situation. "Captain, that valley is a death trap," Webb said, his voice carrying the weight of 27 years in uniform. "The terrain channelizes any approach, and intelligence suggests they have shoulder-fired missiles. We'd be sending you into a meat grinder." Ghost stepped forward, her steel-gray eyes never leaving the tactical display. She'd studied the valley during her previous deployments, had flown reconnaissance missions over those same ridges when they were hunting different targets. Every pilot in theater knew the Kunar Valley's reputation, where aircraft went to die and crews went missing. But she also knew something that the intelligence reports rarely captured. The valley had secrets, hidden approaches that existed in the spaces between satellite images and official flight plans. "Sir, I can get in there," she said, her tone respectful but uncompromising. "The A-10 can handle the ground fire, and I know a route that'll keep me off their radar until I'm on top of them. I've been studying that terrain for months." The operations officer, Major Harrison, shook his head dismissively. "Captain, with respect, one A-10 against 40 fighters in prepared positions. It's suicide. We need to wait for proper close air support, coordinate with artillery, establish a proper fire support plan." Ghost's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "Major, those men don't have time for proper coordination. By the time we establish a fire support plan, we'll be coordinating a body recovery mission instead of a rescue." She turned back to Webb, her expression intense but controlled. "Give me the clearance, sir. I can bring them home." Webb stared at the tactical display, watching the red icons that represented enemy positions slowly tightening their grip around the blue diamond that marked his trapped SEALs. In the background, radio operators continued their desperate attempts to raise the team, their voices growing more urgent with each unanswered call. The clock on the wall showed 3:47 hours, still deep in the darkness that provided both cover and concealment for friend and foe alike. The silence in the operations center stretched like a taut wire, punctuated only by the low hum of electronics and the distant rumble of generators. Webb's fingers drummed against his coffee cup, cold now, forgotten in the crisis unfolding before him. He'd made harder decisions before, had sent good people into impossible situations because the mission demanded it, but something about this felt different. Maybe it was the confidence in Ghost's voice, or maybe it was the growing certainty that conventional rescue attempts would arrive too late. "What's your plan, Captain?" Webb asked finally, his tone suggesting he was willing to listen but not yet convinced. Ghost moved to the large tactical display, her finger tracing a route that seemed to defy logic. "I approach from the southwest, using the Safeco ridgeline to mask my approach. The terrain there drops away sharply. I can stay below their radar horizon until I'm 3 miles out, then pop up for target acquisition." Her finger continued along the route, marking waypoints that existed only in her mental map of the region. "The A-10's gun can engage from 2 miles out with precision munitions. I make one high-speed pass to suppress the positions closest to our guys, then orbit at low level to provide continuous close air support." Major Harrison frowned at the display. "That approach takes you through some of the most dangerous airspace in Afghanistan. The ridgeline approach means flying through known surface-to-air missile sites, and the weather forecast shows deteriorating conditions moving in from the west." "I'm aware of the risks, sir." Ghost's response carried the quiet confidence of someone who had calculated those risks long before she'd volunteered. "But I'm also aware that 8 Americans are fighting for their lives in a valley where nobody else can reach them in time." Webb studied her face, looking for any sign of bravado or false confidence. What he saw instead was the steady resolve of a professional warrior who understood exactly what she was proposing. He'd seen that look before, usually in the eyes of people who were about to do something extraordinary or die trying. The radio crackled suddenly, a burst of static that made everyone freeze. For a moment, hope flickered through the operations center. Maybe the SEALs had re-established communication. Maybe they had found a way out of their desperate situation. But the static faded without revealing voices, leaving only the background hiss of empty frequencies and unanswered prayers. "Time is our enemy here, sir," Ghost said quietly. "Every minute we spend planning is a minute those men don't have." Webb looked around the operations center one more time, taking in the faces of his staff. Some showed skepticism, others resignation, but all reflected the same underlying truth: they were out of conventional options. The rule book said to wait for overwhelming firepower, to coordinate with multiple agencies, to minimize risk through careful planning and redundant systems. But the rule book hadn't anticipated 8 SEALs surrounded in terrain so hostile that even the Taliban considered it a last resort. "Captain Thorne," Webb said finally, his voice carrying the weight of command decision, "you are cleared for immediate departure. Call sign Warthog 77. You have priority handling for all airspace and weapons release authority upon visual identification of hostile forces." Ghost nodded once, sharp and professional. "Roger, sir. Warthog 77 departing immediately." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Sir, I'll need someone monitoring emergency frequencies. If I go down, those SEALs will need to know where to find my survival radio." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Everyone in the room understood that this mission carried risks that couldn't be calculated or mitigated through planning. Ghost was proposing to fly alone into one of the most dangerous valleys in Afghanistan, against overwhelming odds, with no backup and no guarantee of success. The only certainty was that 8 men would die if nobody tried. "I'll monitor personally," Webb replied, "and Captain bring them home." Ghost's hand found the zipper of her flight suit, a nervous habit she developed during her first combat tour. The gesture was subtle, almost unconscious, but it spoke to the weight of responsibility she was accepting. In her peripheral vision, she noticed the intelligence analysts watching her with expressions that ranged from admiration to pity. They all knew the statistics for single aircraft missions in contested airspace. As she walked toward the door, Ghost heard Major Harrison's voice behind her, speaking quietly to Webb. "Sir, I hope you know what you're doing. That valley has claimed 2 aircraft already this year." Webb's response was equally quiet but carried clearly in the still air. "Major, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm betting 8 lives on the best close air support pilot in theater." Outside the operations center, the pre-dawn darkness wrapped around Ghost like a familiar blanket. Her A-10 waited on the flight line, its angular silhouette unmistakable even in the dim illumination of the runway lights. Ground crew personnel were already conducting pre-flight preparations, their movements efficient and purposeful despite the early hour. The walk to her aircraft felt longer than usual, each step carrying Ghost deeper into the mental space she reserved for combat missions. Around her, Bagram continued its restless sleep, the controlled chaos of a forward operating base that never truly rested. Distant conversations in a dozen languages drifted across the tarmac, mixing with the mechanical sounds of generators and air conditioning units working against the Afghan heat that would return with sunrise. Her A-10 Thunderbolt II sat like a predator at rest, its twin engines mounted high on the fuselage to protect them from ground fire and debris. The aircraft's design prioritized survivability over elegance: titanium armor around the cockpit, redundant flight control systems, and the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon that gave the Warthog its legendary reputation. Some pilots flew beautiful aircraft. Ghost flew a flying tank designed to absorb punishment and deliver devastating firepower in return. "Ma'am, she's fueled and armed per your standard loadout," reported Staff Sergeant Martinez, the crew chief who had maintained Ghost's aircraft through 2 deployment rotations. His weathered hands gestured toward the weapons pylons loaded with AGM-65 Maverick missiles and a full ammunition load for the 30 cannon. "I also took the liberty of installing the extended-range fuel tanks. Figured you might need the extra range and loiter time." Ghost nodded her appreciation. Martinez had intuitive understanding of mission requirements that came from years of experience and attention to detail. The extended-range tanks would give her an additional 30 minutes of station time, potentially the difference between success and failure in a prolonged engagement. "Sergeant, I need you to understand something," Ghost said, her voice carrying unusual gravity. "If this goes bad, if I don't come back, I want you to know that this aircraft and your maintenance made the difference for 8 men who needed help when nobody else could provide it." Martinez straightened, his expression showing the mix of pride and concern that defined the relationship between aircrew and ground personnel. "Ma'am, you bring my bird home safe and bring those seals with you. We'll have fresh coffee waiting when you land." Ghost completed her external inspection quickly but thoroughly, her trained eyes scanning for any sign of damage or malfunction that could prove fatal in combat. The pre-flight ritual served multiple purposes: mechanical verification, mental preparation, and a final moment of calm before entering the controlled chaos of aerial warfare. Each checkmark on her mental list brought her closer to the point of no return. Climbing into the cockpit, Ghost felt the familiar embrace of switches, displays, and controls that had become extensions of her own nervous system. The A-10's cockpit was designed for combat efficiency rather than comfort, every instrument and control positioned for rapid access during high-stress situations. Ghost's hands moved through the startup sequence with practiced precision, each switch activation bringing her aircraft to life with mechanical certainty. The twin General Electric engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, eventually settling into the steady rumble that would carry her into the most dangerous valley in Afghanistan. Around her, the cockpit displays illuminated with information streams, navigation data, weapons status, communication frequencies, and threat warnings that painted a comprehensive picture of the battle space she was about to enter. Bagram Tower, Warthog 77 ready for immediate departure, priority handling authorized, she transmitted, her voice calm despite the adrenaline beginning to build in her system. Warthog 77, Bagram Tower, you are cleared for immediate takeoff runway 27, contact departure on 254.75. Weather update shows ceiling dropping to 800 feet with visibility down to 2 miles in your target area. Winds from the southwest at 15 gusting to 25. Ghost acknowledged the weather report with growing concern. Deteriorating visibility would complicate target acquisition and increase the risk of fratricide, the nightmare scenario where friendly fire casualties resulted from misidentified targets. But the weather also meant that enemy shoulder-fired missiles would have reduced effectiveness, their infrared seekers struggling to lock onto targets in the reduced visibility conditions. The takeoff roll felt longer than usual, weighted down with fuel and ordnance that would be essential for the extended mission ahead. As the A-10 lifted off from Bagram's runway, Ghost felt the familiar transition from earthbound machine to aerial predator. Behind her, the sprawling lights of the airbase fell away, replaced by the stark darkness of Afghanistan's mountainous terrain. Departure, Warthog 77 climbing to 8,000, requesting direct routing to operating area, she transmitted, already beginning the subtle course corrections that would take her toward the Kunar Valley via the circuitous route she had planned. Warthog 77, cleared direct. Maintain 8,000 initially. Contact Giant Killer on 243.0 when ready for tactical frequency. Ghost switched to the tactical frequency that would connect her with the ground forward air controller, if one was still alive to coordinate the attack. The radio remained ominously silent as she flew southeast toward the valley where 8 men waited for salvation that might never arrive. Below her, the landscape began to change from the relatively flat terrain around Bagram to the jagged peaks and narrow valleys that defined eastern Afghanistan's unforgiving geography. Her navigation system showed 18 minutes to the target area, but Ghost knew that the real mission would begin long before she reached the valley floor. Success would depend on her ability to approach undetected, identify targets accurately in limited visibility, and deliver precision fires without causing casualties among the very people she was trying to save. The mountains rose around Ghost like sleeping giants, their peaks disappearing into low clouds that would provide both concealment and danger during her attack runs. Her route took her through valleys that few aircraft had explored, following terrain features that existed in the gap between official charts and satellite imagery. This was flying by instinct and experience, using the subtle variations in radar returns and visual cues that separated competent pilots from exceptional ones. Giant Killer, Warthog 77, checking in with full ordnance load, requesting target update and friendly positions. Ghost transmitted on the tactical frequency, hopping that someone was alive and able to coordinate her attack. The response came immediately, crackling with static and the unmistakable sound of gunfire in the background. Warthog 77, Giant Killer, thank God you're here. We have 8 friendlies surrounded in a compound approximately 2 miles southeast of Ghaziabad village. Estimate 40 enemy positions in a horseshoe pattern around the compound, range from 50 to 400 meters from friendly location. Ghost recognized the voice, Master Sergeant David Iron Kowalski, a joint terminal attack controller who had worked with her on previous missions. Iron's presence on the ground meant that target coordination would be precise and professional, assuming he survived long enough to guide her attacks. The sound of automatic weapons fire in the background suggested that survival was far from guaranteed. Iron, Ghost here. I need exact coordinates for friendly position and your best guess on enemy locations with highest threat to friendlies, she replied, her voice carrying the calm professionalism that had defined her reputation throughout 3 combat deployments. Ghost, friendlies are at grid Papa Quebec 785, 421. Primary threat is a heavy machine gun position approximately 200 meters northeast of our location. Coordinates Papa Quebec 787, 423. Secondary threats include multiple small arms positions along the ridgeline to our east and south. Ghost input the coordinates into her targeting system while simultaneously adjusting her approach route to optimize the attack geometry. The heavy machine gun position represented the most immediate threat to the surrounded SEALs, its sustained fire capable of preventing any evacuation attempt. Neutralizing that position would be her first priority, but the challenge lay in distinguishing it from the surrounding terrain features in limited visibility conditions. Iron, what's your marking capability? Can you illuminate targets with infrared or laser designation? Negative, Ghost. We lost our laser designator in the initial contact, and we're conserving batteries on night vision equipment. You'll need to rely on grid coordinates and visual identification. Ghost felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. Attacking targets by grid coordinates alone in limited visibility conditions carried enormous risks of fratricide. But the alternative was allowing 8 Americans to die while she circled overhead with a fully loaded aircraft. The valley began to open before Ghost as she descended through the cloud layer, her altimeter showing 6,000 feet above ground level, still high enough to avoid most small arms fire, but low enough to begin visual acquisition of the target area. Through breaks in the clouds, she could see muzzle flashes scattered across the valley floor like deadly fireflies, their irregular pattern telling the story of a sustained firefight between disciplined defenders and overwhelming attackers. Iron, I have visual on multiple muzzle flashes in the target area. Can you confirm friendly location with strobe light or infrared marker? Ghost, we're in the compound with the flat roof approximately center of the valley floor. I'll activate IR strobe for 10 seconds, mark when you see it. Ghost scanned the valley through her night vision system, searching for the telltale flash of an infrared strobe light that would be invisible to enemy fighters lacking night vision equipment. After several seconds, she spotted a regular pulsing light from a cluster of buildings in the center of the valley, the SEAL's defensive position surrounded by hostile forces that seemed to be closing in from 3 directions. Iron, I have your location marked. I'm beginning my attack run from the southwest, targeting the heavy machine gun position first. Keep your heads down and be ready to mark follow-on targets. Ghost pushed the A-10 into a shallow dive, using the terrain to mask her approach until the last possible moment. The heavy machine gun position Iron had identified was located on a small ridge overlooking the SEAL's compound. its elevated position providing excellent fields of fire, but also making it vulnerable to air attack. Through her targeting system, Ghost could see the distinctive muzzle flashes of a belt-fed weapon delivering sustained fire toward the compound below. Her finger found the trigger for the GAU-8 cannon, the massive weapon that had earned the A-10 its fearsome reputation in close air support missions. The cannon's depleted uranium rounds could penetrate armored vehicles and concrete fortifications, making them devastatingly effective against enemy fighting positions. But accuracy would be critical. A miss of even a few meters could prove fatal to the men she was trying to save. "Iron, guns in from the southwest, danger close," Ghost transmitted, using the brevity code that warned friendly forces of incoming fire from their own aircraft. "Roger, guns southwest, friendlies marked and heads down." Ghost squeezed the trigger, and the A-10 shuddered as the GAU-8 cannon unleashed a 2-second burst of 30 rounds toward the machine gun position. The night exploded with tracers, and the distinctive BRRRT sound that gave the Warthog its nickname, followed immediately by multiple explosions as the depleted uranium rounds found their target. The heavy machine gun position disappeared in a series of brilliant flashes, the sustained fire that had been hammering the SEAL's compound suddenly silenced. Ghost pulled the A-10 into a climbing left turn, scanning for additional targets while avoiding the predictable flight pattern that would make her vulnerable to surface-to-air missiles. Around the valley, she could see enemy muzzle flashes shifting position as Taliban fighters reacted to the sudden appearance of close air support. "Iron, how'd that look?" Ghost transmitted, already identifying her next target, a cluster of fighting positions along the eastern ridgeline that commanded approaches to the compound. "Ghost, beautiful shooting. That machine gun is toast, and the pressure on our north side just dropped significantly. We need you to work the ridgeline positions next. They're keeping us pinned down and preventing extraction." Ghost studied the ridgeline through her targeting system, noting the irregular pattern of muzzle flashes that indicated multiple individual fighting positions rather than crew-served weapons. This would require different tactics, multiple shorter bursts to engage several positions without expending all her ammunition on a single target area. "Iron, I'm going to make multiple passes on the ridgeline positions. Give me a talk-on for the highest priority targets." "Roger, Ghost. Starting from the north end of the ridgeline, I count at least 6 positions spread over 400 meters. The northernmost position has been dropping mortar rounds on us. That's your highest priority." Ghost rolled the A-10 into a steep bank, lining up for another attack run that would take her parallel to the ridgeline rather than directly overhead. This approach would expose her to ground fire for a longer period, but would allow her to engage multiple targets during a single pass. The mortar position Iron had identified posed a particular threat. Indirect fire weapons could reach the compound even if the SEALs found better cover from direct fire weapons. Through her night vision system, Ghost could see the distinctive flash signature of a mortar tube firing, followed several seconds later by the explosion of the round impacting near the compound. The enemy mortar crew was walking their rounds closer to the SEAL's position, each adjustment bringing them closer to a direct hit that could prove catastrophic for the surrounded team. "Iron, I have visual on the mortar position. Guns in from the east, multiple targets along the ridgeline." Ghost lined up her attack run carefully, using the A-10's heads-up display to designate individual targets along the ridgeline. The key would be distributing her fire effectively, enough rounds to neutralize each position, without wasting ammunition on targets that were already destroyed. The second attack run proved even more spectacular than the first, as Ghost's cannon fire swept along the ridgeline like a deadly searchlight. Each burst of 30 rounds created eruptions of rock and debris, silencing enemy positions one by one as she flew parallel to their defensive line. The mortar position that had been threatening the compound disappeared in a particularly brilliant explosion, suggesting that her rounds had detonated stored ammunition or explosive charges. But the attack run also revealed the extent of the enemy presence in the valley. As Ghost pulled away from the ridgeline, she could see muzzle flashes from at least a dozen additional positions that hadn't been firing during her initial assessment. The Taliban had positioned fighters throughout the valley in mutually supporting positions, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. Ghost, outstanding work on the ridgeline. You just bought us some breathing room. Iron's voice carried obvious relief, though the background noise of gunfire continued. But we've got movement on the south side of the compound. Looks like they're trying to flank us while we're focused on the north. Ghost banked the A-10 into a tight orbit around the valley, searching for the flanking movement Iron had detected. The low cloud ceiling and limited visibility made target acquisition challenging, but she could see irregular movement among the buildings and terrain features south of the compound. The enemy was adapting to her presence, using the pause in direct fire to reposition for a coordinated assault on the SEAL's defensive perimeter. Iron, I need you to mark the compound perimeter with IR strobes if you have them. I'm having difficulty distinguishing between friendly and enemy movement in these visibility conditions. Roger, Ghost. We're down to 2 IR strobes, but I'll mark our southern perimeter in 30 seconds. The movement you're looking for should be approximately 50 to 100 meters south of the strobe. Ghost reduced power and descended slightly, bringing the A-10 into a slower orbit that would allow more detailed observation of the target area. The aircraft's twin engines created a distinctive sound signature that would alert enemy fighters to her presence, but maintaining the element of surprise was no longer possible after 2 gun runs through the valley. The IR strobe appeared exactly where Iron had promised, a steady pulsing light that defined the southern edge of the SEAL's defensive position. Beyond the strobe, Ghost could now clearly see multiple figures moving between buildings and terrain features, their movement patterns suggesting tactical coordination rather than panicked retreat. Iron, I have visual on approximately 8 to 10 enemy personnel moving toward your southern perimeter. Request permission for danger close engagement. The radio remained silent for several long seconds, and Ghost could imagine Iron conducting the mental calculations that every ground controller faced when authorizing danger close fire missions. The 13 cannon rounds she would be firing would impact less than 100 meters from friendly positions, well within the danger radius where shrapnel or ricochets could cause friendly casualties. But the alternative was allowing enemy fighters to reach assault distance of the compound. Ghost, you are cleared hot, danger close on southern approaches. We'll mark our exact position with steady IR illumination. Anything south of that light is hostile. Ghost rolled the A-10 into another attack dive, this time approaching from the west to avoid overflying the compound during her attack run. The enemy fighters moving toward the southern perimeter had taken cover among a cluster of abandoned buildings, their positions partially concealed, but still visible through the A-10's targeting system. This would require precise shooting, short bursts aimed at specific targets rather than the area suppression she had used against the ridgeline positions. Guns in from the west, danger close, Ghost transmitted, her finger finding the cannon trigger as the first target entered her crosshairs. The GAU-8 cannon spoke again, this time in shorter bursts as Ghost engaged individual targets among the buildings. Each burst lasted less than a second, but the depleted uranium rounds were devastating against personnel in the open or behind light cover. The enemy flanking movement dissolved as fighters either became casualties or sought better cover, buying additional time for the surrounded SEALs. But as Ghost pulled away from her attack run, she noticed new problems developing. Her fuel gauge showed that extended maneuvering and multiple attack runs were consuming fuel faster than planned, and her ammunition counter indicated that she had expended nearly 40% of her cannon rounds. More concerning, she could see additional muzzle flashes appearing throughout the valley as enemy reinforcements arrived or previously concealed positions revealed themselves. Iron, I'm seeing more enemy activity throughout the valley. What's your assessment of the tactical situation down there? Ghost, your fires have definitely reduced the pressure on our position, but we're still completely surrounded. Enemy strength appears to be at least 30 fighters still active, and we're hearing vehicle movement on the access road from the north. I think they're bringing in reinforcements or heavy weapons. Ghost's tactical display confirmed Iron's assessment. New radar contacts were appearing on the road leading into the valley, their signatures consistent with trucks or other vehicles. If the enemy was bringing in heavy weapons or additional personnel, the tactical balance would shift dramatically against the surrounded SEALs. The sound of vehicle engines reached Ghost even through the cockpit of her A-10, confirming that enemy reinforcements were approaching the valley along the narrow mountain road that served as the primary access route. Through her night vision system, she could see headlights moving in convoy formation, at least 3 vehicles carrying unknown numbers of personnel and equipment toward the ongoing firefight. Iron, I have visual on vehicle convoy approaching from the north, approximately 2 miles out. Do you want me to interdict the reinforcements or continue providing close air support around your position? The question represented a critical tactical decision that would determine the outcome of the rescue mission. Engaging the convoy would prevent enemy reinforcements from reaching the valley, but it would also leave the surrounded SEALs without direct fire support during the most vulnerable phase of their defense. Iron's decision would require balancing immediate survival against longer-term tactical considerations. Ghost, we need those reinforcements stopped before they reach the valley. If they bring heavy weapons or additional personnel, we won't be able to hold our position much longer. Take out the convoy, then return for close air support. Ghost acknowledged the order and turned north toward the approaching vehicles, climbing to gain altitude for the interdiction mission. The mountain road followed a series of switchbacks that would channel the convoy through predictable terrain, creating an ideal target for air attack. But engaging vehicles on a narrow mountain road would require different tactics than the building and personnel targets she had been attacking in the valley. The lead vehicle in the convoy was a pickup truck with what appeared to be a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, a technical vehicle that posed a significant threat to helicopters or low-flying aircraft. Behind it were 2 larger trucks that could be carrying personnel, weapons, or supplies intended to sustain the enemy's siege of the surrounded SEALs. Iron, beginning interdiction of convoy, 3 vehicles confirmed. I'll work them from south to north to prevent the lead vehicle from escaping back down the mountain road. Ghost rolled the A-10 into a shallow dive, approaching the convoy from behind to maximize the time she could keep all 3 vehicles under observation. The mountain road's narrow width and steep terrain on both sides would prevent the vehicles from taking evasive action, but it would also create challenges for target identification and damage assessment in the limited visibility conditions. Her first target was the trailing truck, its larger size and slower speed making it the easiest target to engage accurately. Ghost centered the vehicle in her targeting system and squeezed the cannon trigger, sending a burst of 30 rounds into the truck's cargo area and engine compartment. The truck erupted in flames as Ghost's cannon rounds found their mark, the explosion illuminating the entire convoy and revealing details that had been hidden in the darkness. The lead technical vehicle immediately began accelerating up the mountain road, while the second truck attempted to turn around in the narrow space available, a maneuver that would prove fatal. Ghost pulled the A-10 into a climbing left turn, positioning herself for a second attack run on the remaining vehicles. The technical truck's heavy machine gun was now firing in her direction, tracers streaming past her aircraft as the enemy gunner attempted to engage her during the attack run. But the A-10's armored cockpit and redundant systems were designed to survive exactly this type of ground fire. Iron convoy interdiction in progress. 1 vehicle destroyed, engaging remaining targets. The second truck had managed to turn around on the narrow road, but was now trapped between the burning wreckage behind it and the technical vehicle accelerating ahead. Ghost lined up her second attack run carefully, compensating for the vehicle's movement and the challenging geometry of attacking targets on a winding mountain road. Her cannon burst caught the truck just as it attempted to accelerate away from the burning wreckage, the 13 rounds shredding the vehicle's engine compartment and cab. The truck coasted to a stop, effectively blocking the road and preventing the technical vehicle from retreating back down the mountain. But the technical vehicle continued climbing toward the valley, its heavy machine gun now silent as the crew focused on driving rather than engaging the circling. Ghost realized that allowing even one enemy vehicle to reach the valley could tip the tactical balance against the surrounded SEALs, especially if it carried heavy weapons or additional personnel. Iron, one vehicle still mobile and approaching your location. I'm going to make one more pass to stop it before it reaches the valley floor. Ghost rolled into her most aggressive attack run yet, diving steeply to gain speed and reduce the time the technical vehicle's crew would have to engage her with small arms fire. The mountain road curved sharply just before entering the valley, creating a choke point where the vehicle would be temporarily channeled and unable to take evasive action. The technical vehicle disappeared around the curve just as Ghost opened fire, her cannon rounds impacting the road surface where the truck had been moments before. But as she pulled out of the dive, she could see the vehicle had stopped just around the curve, either destroyed by her fire or disabled by debris from her cannon rounds impacting the road surface. Iron Convoy neutralized. All 3 vehicles stopped or destroyed. I'm returning for close air support around your position. As Ghost turned back toward the valley floor, she could see that the tactical situation had evolved during her absence. The enemy fighters who had been under pressure from her previous gun runs were now repositioning, taking advantage of the lull in close air support to improve their positions and coordinate their attacks. Several new muzzle flashes were visible from locations that hadn't been active during her earlier attacks. Ghost, welcome back. While you were gone, the bad guys got organized. They're massing for what looks like a coordinated assault on our position from multiple directions. We need immediate suppression of the eastern and southern approaches. Iron's voice carried new urgency, suggesting that the enemy's tactical situation had improved significantly during Ghost's interdiction mission. The destruction of the reinforcement convoy had prevented the arrival of additional personnel and heavy weapons, but it hadn't eliminated the 40-plus fighters already in position around the compound. Ghost descended back into the valley's confines, immediately noting changes in the enemy's disposition. The fighters were no longer firing from individual fighting positions, but had concentrated into mutually supporting groups that could provide covering fire for assault teams. This represented sophisticated small unit tactics that suggested experienced leadership among the enemy forces. Iron, I'm seeing multiple groups of enemy fighters in covered positions throughout the valley. What's your ammunition and casualty status? Ghost, we're down to approximately 30% ammunition remaining, and we have 2 wounded who need immediate medical evacuation. The enemy has been